The most important thing a manager can do right now is go back to the office if it's mandated and meet with your people once a week, get to know them, do one-on-ones, and establish those relationships.
Welcome to Tech Talent Today, where IT leaders share their tough challenges, creative solutions, and latest insights. You'll discover fresh ideas and inspiration here with your host, IT staffing veteran and president of Claremont Technologies, Jody Kulik-Mayer. And now, here's Jody.
Welcome to Tech Talent Today. I'm your host, Jody Kulik-Mayer. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Kate Horstman. Kate is co-host of the Manager Tools podcast and a presenting associate. Kate has presented more than 475 Manager Tools training days at their public conference and at client locations, including international events. In addition, 18 months into COVID, she's now delivered more than 750 hours of virtual training to both client organizations and public sessions. She's been using Manager Tool guidance for more than 12 years. After joining Manager Tools part-time in 2008, Kate used Manager Tool principles in her role as a missile defense engineer, leading teams and projects with Manager Tools guidance at Orbital Sciences Corporation. She's a mechanical engineering graduate of Tulane University. Kate also serves as Manager Tools client business and roadmap product owners, where she's been instrumental in evolving the roadmap app. Her work has focused on enhancing user experience and data reporting for clients and individual users. Welcome, Kate. Thanks so much for being here.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me. This is going to be fun.
Yeah. So Steve Watts, who you may remember from the podcast Defending Data and the Future of Storage, turned me on to Manager Tools. He said he loves your podcast. So I had to listen to it, and I loved it too. You know, I thought that it's really cool that the podcast has been around for 16 years. Like, that was before, like, everybody has had a podcast. And how long have you been doing the podcast?
We transitioned this year from Mark and Mike, who are co-founders, hosting, to Sarah Sentis and I co-hosting. Mark and Mike hosted the cast for years. We have been putting out the cast for 16 years. It's a little bit vague. It's not transparent that we have 3 casts that come out: Manager Tools, which comes out on Mondays; Career Tools, which comes out on Thursdays; and then Executive Tools, which comes out on Wednesdays every other week. So Sarah and I co-host Manager Tools, and we've been doing that this year. This is our first year doing that. Mark and Mike now host Executive Tools. So they're still involved in hosting, but they're hosting for our audience who's been with us since the beginning. And we just put out our Sweet 16 cast, and we talked about starting out and things like that. And we were in the podcast store the day after it went live. So we've been doing this for a while, but now podcasting is cool.
Oh, it wasn't cool back then? Or people didn't know about it?
I think it was cool. And I didn't know a lot of people who talked about podcasting. I live in Austin, and I think of Austin as being more involved with the zeitgeist than other places I've lived. I was in Phoenix for years, and Phoenix is probably less into trendy things. Austin is really into that. And I found in the last 5 years that there's a lot of people in my social circles in Austin talking about being on a cast or involving podcasts in their business and things like that. And it's so funny to me because I think most people who know of Manager Tools think about the cast rather than the fact that we do trainings and conferences, and we're really about helping managers to be professional and productive. And I think people think of the cast, whereas I think of us as like a training and consulting firm more than anything. And the cast is really helpful. It's also really fun for us because we get to chat about our thoughts about management and careers and things like that, which isn't something people in my social circle are always super into.
Right.
It's a good outlet for our passion. It's like a podcast hobby thing.
Right. People who are interested and want to hear about, right, management techniques and guidance. One thing I really loved about Manager Tools is it is timeless guidance. that to give like a framework that could be applied to current situations. And these days we have more current situations than we'd like. I know you did a podcast on the vaccine and also hybrid office meetings, and the principles you applied that could be used for a lot of different things. So I thought that was really great. I'm just curious, on the vaccine podcast, did you get any pushback from that, or what was the response to that?
We did. When we put out guidance, it's what we believe is right. When we put out guidance, we have three main tenets: that it will not harm your career, that we won't, give you any guidance that would put your career in any jeopardy, kind of like a first do no harm thing. We also focus greatly on timelessness and just content that will work now and worked 10 years ago and will work 10 years from now. And we also focus on actionable. So we want it to be that you can use it to take action, to implement something. It's not theoretical as much as it is, you can use this and you can use it right now, hopefully. We did get pushback on our vaccine cast. We had some people who weren't comfortable with our position, which is if your manager and your organization mandates vaccination, that you need to, as an agent of the organization, support that. Ask your people to meet that standard, meet it yourself as well. Now, excepting if you have a health concern that would preclude you from being vaccinated. And largely, the conclusion there is if you don't want to be involved in what your corporation or organization asks you to do, that you have the choice. You could go work somewhere else where they don't require vaccines. We did get some pushback on that. We get mail, we get mail from people.
Probably on everything you get
That's
pushback.
True.
That is particularly touchy, but I did like the timeless guidance from that is that if your company is mandating something, you need to be on board with it if you're a manager, whatever it is. And at any time you're not on board of it, you have at-will employment. So that is what I loved about your podcast, that those tenets are true for a current situation. What I wanted to talk about that I think is going to be on people's minds is going back to the office in person.
Yeah. I think when we started talking about recording together, right? I think I thought that it wouldn't be as contentious or it wouldn't be as inflammatory. And in fact, now with a new strain of the virus, it's looking like this will be even more important for listeners, because going back to the office is going to be something that most organizations are going to ask of their people. It's, I think, going to be the biggest thing that happens in 2022 in organizations in terms of changes and things that occur. And going back for some people is it's going to be stressful. It's going to be worrisome. Genuinely, if your organization asks that you come back, it would be detrimental to your career not to do so. Maybe not for your whole career, but your career in this organization that you're currently in. If your organization says, hey, we're going back to the office, and you don't want to do that, I would suggest that that's another opportunity to exercise your right to work at another location, because it can be harmful to your career. There's really three types of professional power, right? There's subject matter expert, like expertise power, where you're the smartest person in the room. And I always joke, because I used to be an engineer, that's why engineers go to meetings, so they can be the smartest person in the room. And that expertise power isn't really as much part of the discussion around the vaccine, but it is part of the larger discussion, I think. So there's expertise power, there's role power, which is granted by the organization for your managerial positions, right? And then there's relationship power. And expertise power can only get you so far, right? In fact, the very first podcast we ever put out was called The Solution to a Stalled Technical Career. And it was about a friend of ours who was incredibly intelligent, massively educated, just really, really, really technical, proficient, great guy. And he was struggling because he couldn't reach the next level in his organization because he didn't have any relationships. And it turns out that role power, to a certain extent, can be achieved. And then there's a level at which, without relationship power, your role power will not increase, no matter how big your expertise is. If you don't go back to the office, you will not be able to establish the relationships needed to increase your position. Now, I know a lot of people in IT, like in technical positions, they believe that promotions aren't really important. And if you don't want to increase your role power or increase your relationship power, then maybe back to the office isn't as big of a deal for you. Maybe you go to work for a company where everyone is remote. Maybe that's what you do, is you say, you know what? There are companies where everyone is remote. That's the kind of place that I want to be involved in. I do want to make really clear, though, even when everybody's remote, relationships are still really important. If you could get everything that needed to get done on your own, organizations wouldn't exist. And they do. And the productivity associated with a team and being involved in a team is exponentially powerful in terms of the organization and our effectiveness. And if that's the case, there's going to be humans wherever you work.
Right. Some technical people might not like that.
And listen, it's interesting because in managerial mindset, I think, there's this idea that there's managers out there who don't have any real work. They only manage. It's like a myth. It's not true. I know more managers. Well, I guess my direct Andrew is probably talking to more managers right now than I am, just because he's presenting a lot of our trainings right now. And I think like this week, he presented more trainings than me. But next week, I'm presenting to, 150 managers. So I think I know more managers than most people. I can tell you they all have real work. There's no just managing manager. There's also, I think, a myth in the tech space, and maybe it's not a myth. There's 10 guys out there that there's people who are just running things like out of the garage. And that's, it's funny because some of those people have become wildly successful. And now that they're wildly successful, there's people.
Right.
It's like that social media video going around that's like, oh no, people. It turns out people are involved in organizations. So if you don't go back to the office, your relationships are going to suffer. And listen, if you're a technical person, you've heard of the Allen curve, communication largely drops to zero at 50 meters. And then people will say, oh gosh, Kate, what about Slack? Well, that's so sweet. It doesn't fix it, right? People communicate more with people they see face to face. And that's going to cause a detriment to your career if you're not there for those face-to-face conversations.
Right. There's also like the serendipitous meetings when you're in the office, not necessarily the formal meetings, or sometimes the chat after the meeting.
Yes. These organic conversations that I think largely a lot of people missed during COVID, right? Like in the main lockdown, I think when people were really largely not working, right? And organizations hadn't pivoted, there were less interpersonal communications. And I find even the people I know who are more reserved, more taciturn, more likely not to want to talk to people. I even found those people I know to feel, gosh, I'm not talking to people. It's kind of draining. They wanted to go and do things and see people. So there's the organic conversations that happen when you're in the office. Also, too, if your organization's in the office and you're not top of mind, right? It's like out of sight, out of mind, which might mean that you're not picked for like the cool new project because you're not around for your manager to think of you as often. You also miss out on the complexities of discussions that happen in those, as you mentioned, before meeting or after meeting or even hallway conversations. There's the subtleties of projects that you don't hear about on Slack or, when you're zoomed in, right? If you're the remote person in the meeting, you just don't have the same level of communication. And it's going to make it harder for you to get stuff done, which is the most important thing about being remote is getting things done. In fact, if you're an individual contributor, getting things done is always the most important thing. And it's going to put you in a position of not being as visible to or valuable to your manager because of that remoteness. So yeah, it's going to mean less opportunities for promotion, but maybe you're not worried about that if you're a really technical person. Maybe that's not something you're interested in, is promotion. It is also going to limit the stuff that you get to do. It's going to mean that you're not picked for the cool new project, or you're not thought of for the interesting new thing. And I hear a lot of, well, I don't want to get promoted, but technical people, especially in software, really, honestly, they have to stay ahead of the curve the most with new languages and operating systems and all kinds of stuff I quite frankly am not qualified to understand. My degrees are in mechanical engineering, not software. And it turns out they're not the same thing. It's really,
right.
Software engineering is incredibly hard. And I only highlight these examples because this is not a software or technical problem, right? A lot of people feel this way. I highlight it because those are the places where I see it the most often. If you're a person whose organization is going back to the office and you don't go back to the office, it's going to make it harder for you in your relationships, in your promotions, and in your work. It's a choice. You have a choice.
One thing I really liked in your podcast where you discussed working from home, and that podcast was called Working from Home Will Stunt Your Career, and we'll put that up in the show notes, is again, it gives you a framework to make a decision. So you get to think about what's important to you. It's like you lay out the pros and the cons, just like you did here so beautifully. So you can decide, right? Do I want to work for a remote company? What do I care about? Is it more important for me to be working from home? So I love that framework. What I also love about Manager Tools, it's like a resource when a technical person is first promoted into management, right? You can't learn things fast enough. So I guess tell a bit how, Manager Tools can help somebody with that when they're in that situation. It's
so funny. I don't know that we really started out thinking, oh, we want to help people in that space. And I'm making a finger symbol, which isn't helpful, right? Because no one can see us except us. There's a gap. And it's not even just a technical gap. It's anytime you go from individual contributor to manager. If you're in an individual contributor role that you were trained for, maybe because you went to university or because you educated yourself in that area, you probably have enough understanding of what it is to be successful in that role. And it's largely also usually communicated to you, like the organization tells you, this is what you need to do. And if that's the case, that's an individual contributor situation, then okay, now you have to make that jump to manager. There's sort of this expectation that you'll just know how to be a manager. Somebody said to me it's been a while. Somebody said, management is the last science that everyone believes we learn through osmosis. And in fact, that's not true. And it's quite difficult. And they don't tell you. What they don't tell you is when you're an individual contributor, you are responsible for results. And that's true of everybody. As a manager, you're still responsible for results. And now, on top of that, you're also given a secondary responsibility, which is retention. Because they don't tell you that, and because they kind of hope that you'll figure it out, you can listen to the podcast. The good news, we have 1,600 episodes of the cast online. They're all free. Okay, so you can listen to the cast at any time. You can listen in Apple Podcasts. You can listen on our website in your browser. You can listen in our app. We have all kinds of ways to listen. We are not on Spotify or Pandora because they insert ads and we don't actually do ads. And you can listen to anything. You can listen to podcasts about how to run a staff meeting, how to write a thank you note, how to do one-on-ones with your team. And we're just hoping to fill that space between, hey, I got promoted. I know what I'm doing in my individual contributor role. And now I'm at sea. And if you're listening and you're in that position, that is totally normal. It's completely normal. The only time I really see people getting training about management before they become a manager is when their manager is a listener to our cast and they send them to a public conference, which we host virtual and in-person conferences. I think we do 30 to 40 of those in person a year. And we do, 3 virtual a month. So there's many opportunities for you to come to that event. And people will listen and then they'll send their directs so that their directs can make the jump more easily. It's just that, imagine, where did you learn to run a staff meeting? You learned it from the other managers you've had in the past. And so people kind of cobble together an understanding of what it means. And listen, y'all are too smart to be having to think about how to run a staff meeting. we can tell you how to run a staff meeting, and then you can use all that glorious brain power for things like how to design whatever it is that you're designing, or, how to solve the world's big problems, because we can teach you how to run a staff meeting, and then you can teach the world how to find clean drinking water for everyone on the planet or something like that. I don't know.
Right. People don't have to reinvent the wheel. You have a great process out there for them, and they can always take it from there.
And the casts are really specific, y'all. It's like, do this, do this, do this, do this. It's a checklist. Our co-founders, Mark and Mike, are engineers. We want clear guidance on what to do. And that's what we're trying to provide to people so that they know what to do and they don't have to guess. So
I like it so that managers can get training like on how to interview and retention, because that also helps me, in being a recruiter. It'll help attract and keep more people to their firm. So that's really why I wanted to talk to you. I thought your podcast and your offerings were such a great resource that I wanted people to know about it. So
thank you.
Yeah, I really appreciate you coming on to talk about that. Now, you mentioned to me that you were a missile defense engineer, which is so cool. You don't run into somebody who does that every day. So I guess tell me about that, and then how you made the jump into working with manager tools.
So I went to school for engineering. So I have a mechanical engineering degree from Tulane, and I wanted to be an engineer my whole life. I was actually lucky enough to go to a really great high school in Fredericksburg, Texas. And our high school had a program around STEM, really, right? Like science, technology, engineering, and math. And we got to build rockets in class. The first day of class, our teacher, he said, okay, you have to take 1 pound to 1 mile. What would you do? And then he kind of set us free in this like miniature library he had built. And we got to design a ballistic rocket capable of 100,000 feet. And we got to test it out at White Sands Missile Range. And NASA helped us. And, we just had all these great mentors and teachers and things. And it was, imagine being a high school kid and basically being told, oh, hey, here's this really cool project that you get to work on. Like, you can build rockets. And I just got kind of a bug for it. And so I went to school for engineering. My dad's an engineer, so that was something he really said, go ahead, do it. Like, that sounds great. My mom was incredibly supportive of it. And so I went to school, and then in the space, while I was there, my dad started a podcast. So my father, Mark, is one of our co-founders, and the podcast was largely him and his best friend from West Point talking about management, and really more trying to help more people in management, right? Like, try to help more people to manage better and be able to do their jobs better. And when I was at university, I helped them. I interned with Mark and Mike and kind of helped out a little bit. I did that while I was working as an engineer. So when I graduated, I was hired by Orbital Sciences, which has gone through some mergers since then. So then they merged with ATK, and now they're actually Northrop Grumman. And I was there for like 8, almost 9 years out at Orbital in Phoenix, and worked for manager tools in some capacity throughout that time frame. And then Orbital went through this merger with ATK, and they wanted to move me out to Utah, which would have been great, except it's further from my family, who's largely here in Texas and then in the southern United States. And I didn't really want to move any further west at the time. So I started looking for new roles and did a bunch of interviewing, and finally kind of decided that maybe I could bring my experience into manager tools and be helpful and be another person helping others learn and benefit from our learnings and my mistakes. I mean, I just like anybody else as an engineering, team member and lead, struggled. Like, I really struggled making that jump. And I've been in this role at Manager Tools as a presenting associate for 6 years. So I've been here for 6 years doing this. And now at this point, I've been presenting for 6 years. I run one of our, we do a private trainings, like client trainings on site and virtual for private groups. And so I run that portion of our business. And then I also host our main podcast, which is Manager Tools now. So more than anything, what's interesting about it is more than anything, the reason I went from missile defense engineer to presenter.
Right. But I think like management training.
Yeah.
Presenter. Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Was because my relationships. I loved my previous job. It was great. It was really cool. And there aren't very many things that would have convinced me to leave there. And the only thing that really ended up convincing me was that I had this relationship with Manager Tools, understood their goals, their values. And, I think one of the things that gets missed in those discussions of career progression is the fact that you have to really, really, really believe in what you're doing, or else it's really hard to be motivated to work as hard as you need to help make your position and your company successful. I mean, it's one of the things I think is really important is to find a place to work where you really genuinely believe in what they're doing. Now, being a part of the team that defends our country is pretty powerful. And I genuinely found that to be important work. And the only thing that trumped that mission was my relationship with this company and what I see its values as. So,
yeah, I think you've made a difference in both your jobs.
Well, thank you. That's a kind thing to say.
I think so. I think I like how Manager Tools really presses like how important building relationships are. I think because relationships make life sweeter, but it also helps you get things done. So I love that. And I like that your firm is available to, regular people who want to get training for themselves and people who like to self-educate, but also companies can hire you guys too to do training for them.
Yeah, we do trainings all over the world. In fact, Mark was in Boston yesterday. I'm presenting virtual events next week to London and some Asian groups. We really want to help as many people as possible succeed as professionals and as managers. So
if someone wanted to get in touch with you or look up your company, what's the best way for them to get in touch?
Our website is manager-tools.com. And when you get there, if everything is blue and orange, you've found us. And if people can email me. I mean, you can just email me if you'd like. My email is Kate, Kate, @managertools.com. And then you can also email customer service. You can email customer service @managertools.com. You can also find us on Apple Podcasts. If you download our app, there's a button to send us an email anytime.
I did download your app, by the way.
Yeah. Oh, good.
Yeah. I thought it was very convenient.
I'm glad. Yeah. It makes it really easy to listen. And I was talking to somebody the other day. You can listen in the app. You can change. And I think you can do this. I don't know how though. Like, I think you can do it in other apps. You can change the speed at which you listen.
Yes, you can. Yes.
Which is, yeah, you can do that in our app, which is really nice because there's so much content to get through.
It's true. And also that I'm from like the New York, New Jersey area. We like to talk fast and have everything happen fast. So got to get as much information in as possible.
Yeah. I got a note last week from somebody who has been listening for a long time. And they said they used to listen to Mark and Mike at 1.5 speed, but Sarah and I talk too fast. And so they can only listen at 1.25.
That's funny.
Yeah. It was interesting. So.
Kate, do you have any parting thoughts?
I guess probably the only thing that I really, in terms of like going back to the office, y'all, if your company asks you to go back to the office and your manager is going back, the best thing to do is to be there, comparable number of days with your manager, be present there and really focus on delivering your results. It's different if you're an individual contributor versus a manager. If you're a manager, it really is it's not required, but it is so important that you go back to the office. It is really going to be hard to have those conversations and be effective with your team, right? As an individual contributor, it's easier to stay home. It's easier to get stuff done if you're at home than it is if you're a manager at home. Not easier to get stuff done across the board, right? And I think people have forgotten that largely a lot of the success of remote work from the pandemic comes from external business pressures, right? If your company was wildly successful during the lockdowns, it may be simply that there were external business pressures involved. You also have to think about the fact that people, when they worked from home at the beginning of lockdowns and things, worked longer hours. They didn't leave their desks. They didn't have much else to do, honestly. And so as we transition back into more openness in our environments, there's likely going to be a decrease in that productivity based on shorter hours. And I think too, I don't want us to confuse, people say, oh, maybe it was better, productivity was up. I don't know that that's accurate. Again, external business pressures. Also, let's not base our understanding of how it went on how people feel. If you feel that you were more productive, that's not really a measure for me, right? And largely because I can't compare it to how other people feel, right? How you measure how much productivity you accomplished and how you feel about that and how I measure it are different. And so I don't want people to understand that, oh, it was better and that was fully a function of people being at home. I don't believe that that's true. I actually think there's a lot of distractions at home for a lot of people, and it doesn't always go as well. So I want to encourage people to, if you don't know what your company's going to do, if your company's not back yet, talk to your manager, find out what's going to happen. And if they don't know, it may be that the organization hasn't defined it yet, but it's time to start considering the benefits of being in the office and the perks on your career and your work overall, I guess. Yeah.
Those are great points. And I think something that came up in the podcast was that people can't use 2020 as like a measure because everybody was home. So when some people are back in the office and you're still home, it's not the same playing field. So I thought that was a key point as well.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And I think it too, there's a lot of talk right now about how hot the job market is, and that's accurate, right? It is.
Yes, very hot.
If you're a manager and you're wondering, what am I supposed to do about that? The answer is start one-on-ones now and start building relationships with your team members so that they stay because of you. When your directs think of the organization, they think of you. And if your relationship with them isn't strong, there's a chance they might go somewhere else. And if they go somewhere else, largely because of freedom of information, they're likely going to be able to achieve the same compensation, things like that. So outside forces are less crucial in terms of their choice of where to work than their manager and their relationship with their manager. So the most important thing a manager can do right now is go back to the office if it's mandated and meet with your people once a week, get to know them, do one-on-ones, and establish those relationships. It would be great if work was about working in your garage by yourself. And it's really not. It's so funny. When I was an engineer, I would talk to my mom about her work, and she was working in a bank. And when people talk about work, they don't talk about their tasking. They talk about the people at their job. When my mom talks about working at the bank, and you compare that to what it sounds like when I was working in missile defense, it sounds the same because people are talking about other people, because that's the most important thing.
I agree. It's always about the people. Kate, I really enjoyed our conversation today. Thank you so much for making the time. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks so much, Jody.
Thanks for listening. See you next time.
Thanks for listening to Tech Talent Today, brought to you by Clearmont Technologies IT Staffing and Search. You can find out more at clearmonttech.com. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe and share. See you next time.